But at the same time, you know that people go through a process, and very often what you see is not what the artist started with. It's not like he started, I'm going to make a painting with scratches, but it's a whole thinking process, and it might be the end result of a year of work to get to this thing. And for the artist and his process, this makes total sense. If it's too easy, I think it's not good enough, because you see the struggle in the work, I think, is creating your own problems and then finding the solution for them.
Hi everyone, I'm here with the lovely Aukje, and we're in her studio, her sculpture studio. It's really nice to be in an artist studio because there's just so many interesting knickknacks and pieces, and we have sculptures, we have things that are in between. So Aukje, maybe if you start with, I guess, a bit of an introduction of yourself and what led you into a world of art, what led you into sculpture?
Well, I've always been a maker, I think from very young on. So just love doing things with my hand, making, but not straight like wood. I find terrible to work with because you have to be so particular. So it's always been clay or plaster or something. And that sort of developed more into wax building, which I love. And that becomes bronzes. And I still love to work with clay, but obviously very different than when I was a child. And I love to work with cement as well, because you can work really big and you make outdoor sculpture. So as long as it's plastic. Yeah.
And that's really interesting because all those materials you mentioned there, as you said, they're moldable, it's flexible, right? It's a plastic, to your point.
Yeah.
What is it about that captures your creativity or inspiration?
I think I have an image in my mind of where I want to go, but it's not very precise. So it's more of a vague idea and maybe a movement that I want to do, because my main inspiration is animals. Even if I don't want to make an animal, when I work, it becomes an animal. So I have that idea, but you're guided by the material. And that's why every material brings me a different type of sculpture or a different look. If you work in material, like in wood, you really have to plan ahead. You have to know exactly what you're going to do. And that just really does not suit me at all.
So that's actually really interesting because I know you and I, we've talked bits about creativity, and even just what you described there, it brings to mind for me that almost two forms of creativity. One is like planned, it's designed, it's sort of thought about, but it strikes me what you're talking about a lot is call it an emergence of shape.
Yeah, it's well, the way I work is very intuitive. So, I have sometimes that I plan to make, like, say something, a pig, but then it becomes a horse or a duck or whatever. It's just because the material that day wants to become this. When I try to force it into my plan, it just does not work. So I have to go with what it gives me. And sometimes this is what I really like about plastic material, is that when you work in it, you suddenly see something and you really like it, and you go, oh, I'm going to repeat that, or I'm going to use that shape more, or that technique or effect. It sort of teaches you while you are working. Yeah, and it's when I work with metal, I actually work the same, because I still bend and, heat the metal, bend it, weld it together, try it differently. So that's just how my brain works. Yeah.
I think you started learning sculpture when you were young?
Yeah, well, in high school, we were lucky enough to have like 3D sculpting, or I don't really know the English word for it. But so we did a lot. We worked in wood and clay and copper, and there was a lot possible at our high school. And then after high school, I went to art uni. So art teacher, I studied to become an art teacher, which in the Netherlands is a specialized profession. And we were lucky enough to have such a well-equipped workshop. We had a clay workshop, we had wood, steel, but we also had photography. Obviously, there was a lot of painting, watercoloring, printing. We did textiles, we did everything. And then you could specialize over the years. And it made that I have a lot of skills, and then you can hone the skills that suit you.
So over time, I'm really curious about this, because you mentioned that you're an intuitive sculptor. How would you say your craft has evolved over the years? Like, what's something that you would do now that that high school, the university Aukje wouldn't do?
Definitely more pride in skill and finishing off and make it professional. Because even though it starts very intuitive and you get the shape and the whatever comes, you make it happen, but then it still has to be qualitative, really good. So I've learned a lot about that precision, like the quality of your welds when you're welding. You know, when you're clay, you compress it so that it just doesn't fall apart. Learned a lot about glazing. I've learned a lot about how to make your products safe for someone who buys them and puts them in their house, so there's no sharp edges and all those things. I think as a viewer, even if you don't know this, you do see that that's there, that attention to detail.
I'm glad you brought up this point, because I think, especially in the world of modern art, or even into the world of postmodern art, sometimes we can see these pieces where people don't necessarily understand what's going on. And I say that as somebody who sits on the other side of that. I'm really a bit of an audience surrogate. And, you know, I will own up and I'll fess up to the fact that I've been to galleries and it's just gone, I don't get this. This feels like child's play. And it can be difficult to understand the craftsmanship. Even looking at some of your sculptures here, it's like people might at a crude glance go, oh, well, it doesn't look like there's refinement because it's knobbly and it's not smooth. Yeah. But there's something about how that intention is conveyed.
I think artists are the worst critics of art. Artists, maybe. Because I often have the same way you have. When you walk through a gallery or when you look at work, you sort of go, really? But at the same time, you know that people go through a process, and very often what you see is not what the artist started with. It's not like he started, I'm going to make a painting with scratches. But it's a whole thinking process, and it might be the end result of a year of work to get to this thing. And for the artists and his process, this makes total sense. You've got rules that are sort of guidelines. I think most people have heard of the golden rule, or the golden...
The golden ratio?
Yeah, golden ratio.
Yeah.
Like, that is such a basic thing. Obviously in sculpture, that's a little bit harder, but in painting, you know, those kind of things really make such a difference for the balance of your work. And if you're not aware of all those things, your work will look pretty shit.
Well, what you've just said just kind of inspired a few thoughts through me, because with a profession, say engineering,
yeah,
to be good at engineering, where typically requires good understanding of maths, various aspects of physics or chemistry, depending on which area of engineering you're in. And so it can be easy in some ways to kind of understand, okay, here's that practice, here's the expertise, here's the refinement. But art in the humanities space sits in such a different context. However, there is still refinement. And now this time we're not talking about just the refinement of technique, but it's almost like the refinement of thought. You know, the refinement of creativity. And to your point, it sort of strikes me that a difference between, say, an emerging artist and a really masterful artist is that if they both produce something that is unrecognizable, a master artist might know how to not so much hide, but convey those things, those basic rules, without people necessarily understanding.
Yeah, because they're not the most important in the work. They're just as a base knowledge. And I think it's really easy to dismiss some modern art as rubbish. That's really easy. But I think, like with everything that you want to enjoy or want to appreciate or want to actually have an opinion on, you want to learn something about it, and that takes a bit of effort. And I think that's the same with art, and maybe with art even more. But it's not just the artist making something for you that is really easy to understand. There is also the input of the viewer on how to experience the artwork, and for some, like in some art, obviously that's a lot easier than in other artwork. What I like to do is in my sculptures, I try to tell a story, and that story is in me, and that comes out. And because I work the way I work. It's not always clear to me what the story is when I'm making it. For example, during COVID, I made a lot of sculpture because I had a lot of time here. And in hindsight, I can see like the period during COVID, what I was making. I've made really happy birds. I've made a very sad horse with a rider. And in hindsight, I go, oh yeah, that was exactly the timing of, we got over the lockdowns and that's when the horse came. And when we sort of had a breakthrough and we were out of lockdown for a while, that's when the birds came. And in hindsight, I can say, oh yeah, that was the happy period. So for me, it's not always clear what I'm depicting. Sometimes I realize afterwards, like, oh yeah, that's exactly how I felt at the time about a particular thing.
I think it's really interesting that you talk about the audience being the co-creator of a story. And I think many stories are like that these days. Even if we take art out of it and we tell just a regular human story, what often happens is that you've got the person who's speaking, and then you've got the audience, but the audience brings all of their various bits of baggage to the table.
Yeah.
And so everyone is going to see something different and hear something different. And I'm sort of curious because you're very well traveled as well. And so as a artist who has also then traveled the world, and you've mentioned before you've been an audience member as well, how has it, I guess, changed your thinking around different forms of creative expression? Has it changed the way that you think about your art? Has it changed how you make it? Has it changed how you engage with other people's art as being someone who's on both sides of that?
Yeah, well, definitely. We always go to lots of museums, but I also really like to go to what you call ethnic museums, or when you're in the country itself, the National Museum, because that's the traditional art that they show. For a long time, I've been really inspired by South American art or Mongolian art. The shapes and the forms and the stories that they tell, that's not natural to a Westerner like me. So that really opens my mind. And I take thousands of photos and try to remember it all and take it in. Does it really then reflect in my work? I'm not so sure, actually. You'd think it does because it's all there, but I'm not so sure if it really reflects in my work.
That's an interesting, call it duality. For artists. I think of, say, emerging artists, and it is for someone who's trying to figure out what their message is and what their theme is and what's their underlying intention. Where else can they draw but from their life experiences? Over time we sort of pick up those things. But I think that there's that balance between taking inspiration from things and maybe different lenses of seeing things, but then still, like, who is it you? What's your...
Yeah, your brain is such an important tool in the art.
In terms of your creativity, like, what are 2 or 3 things you do that are a little bit perhaps off the beaten path to get yourself into a creative zone?
Well, you never start with something that's really important. So when I'm working on wax, I said to you before, this is my clay table, but it's not completely true, because when I work at my waxes, which happens here, I have one here and I have one here. So when I'm done there, and it's just, you get your brain overload, you do this one, and this one is completely different. So this might be the serious one, and this might be the fun, the funky one, like that one. So have variation, have multiple things going, so you can, depending on your mood, that's the one you work on. You're in that mood to be really in the zone and focus and work precise. So that's one thing. The variation. I think landing in your studio is very important.
Landing in your studio.
So it's, for me, I'm very lucky that I have my my studio 200 meters from the house. I go here, so I walk down, and then I sort of always walk around first, and I think and start to tidy a little bit, clean a little bit, and then I start work. And something will present itself. Obviously, when I'm really into sculpture, like the last few months I was doing the waxes, I go straight away there. But generally, I still clean up before I do that. So for years, I felt really bad because I tend to get really absorbed in my work. And then at some stage, I look at my watch and it's like 7:30 p.m. But then, of course, I get up, I just switch off all the electricity and I go So when I come in the next day, it's a mess. And I always felt really bad about that. I was like, oh, I should clean up. It should be better. And then a friend of mine who's also a sculptor said, no, that's called landing. And I was like, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm cleaning up before I start. And that makes you get into the zone.
And I think, if anything, that maybe says something about this world of this notion of creativity, where it's not, like you said, you just hear and all of a sudden things are just creative. There really is some sort of structure that you have to bring to that creativity in order to be able for you to express what you want to express.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you can't rely on vague ideas that are floating around and, oh my God, I'm so creative. It is something you have to train. It's something you have to train to think that way, to work that way, and to let it go. And even accepting, this is such a big part of it, accepting that things do not go to plan. I have that very often, that I go, oh God, this is the worst sculpture I've ever made, and it's just a waste of 2 weeks' work. And I've had to learn over time that those will become my best sculptures if I don't give up. And it's really hard to accept that. But like most of the sculptures that I actually finish, I have that. Because if I don't, well, maybe I have a few that were sort of an easy do, but then I'm not happy with them afterwards because there's not enough of me in there. If it's too easy, I think it's not good enough because you see the struggle in the work, I think.
That's really, I'd love that framing, because that's a fantastic perspective that in some ways what might give a sculpture or a piece of art, or sometimes even an idea, real heft in some ways. The real, I don't want to use the word credibility, but like this sort of believability, texture, all that type of stuff are the imperfections coded into it.
Yeah, you learn the most from your mistakes, right? And going and finding solutions to get through them. And a friend of mine who's a really famous sculptor, he said, sculpture is creating your own problems and then finding the solution for them. And that is what it is. It's a constant string of, why am I even doing this? If I did that, it would be finished like within a day and it'd be easy. But you just know it's too easy. Yeah.
That's actually really beautiful. I think even as a little life story, it's what I'm taking away from something like that is that, if we set out on any endeavor, we're kind of doing it to ourselves.
Yeah.
We could have just, to use a stereotype, just gotten a regular job and just did the regular thing and not step out of our comfort zone at all. But so in the world of art, as with say entrepreneurship or leadership or anyone who wants to make something happen, we kind of do it to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
We kind of want to go out there because there's something we think we might be able to do that's a little bit different. But what characterizes that journey really is all the imperfections along the way, the lessons that we create the problem and then we find a solution for the problem. I love that. So let's have a chat about your art. So you've got a few sort of sculptures here.
Most of them are unfinished because my finished ones are in shows or in galleries. This one is actually, a version of this is actually at the Foundry, so it is becoming a bronze. It misses a leg. But it's this was inspired. Last year we went to Africa. We've been a month in Africa. They've got the wild dogs there, and the way they move, they're almost elastic in their legs, and they have freedom with, long necks and play. That necks are actually not that long, but it just comes across that way. Like they're really fluid and they're very playful. But there's a really close herd, and you can see everyone has their role. And we were lucky enough that a whole group, because they're pretty rare, a whole group passed our campsite, and we had about half an hour of just watching them, and it was amazing. So this sculpture is, this part of this sculpture is based on that. So the long legs that are sort of floating in the air, this one only has 2 legs on the ground, and then that one goes that way and that one goes that way. So no one who looks at this will go, oh, that's an African wild dog. But for me, it is, because it shows their movement. And that's, for me, much more important, that essence, than exactly how they look in a photograph.
So my background is Chinese, and in a Chinese context, often there is this focus on just paint what you see, right? But it's a very literal interpretation of that sometimes. So like if I were to take my mom to a art gallery, she wouldn't understand it because, or she might just go, this doesn't look like a dog. Yeah. Because she's expecting recreation, like in perfect form, whereas what you're trying to capture is movement. Yeah. And so, and that's how do you capture movement as a steel, like a solid object, so to speak? Yeah, that's that is, and that's, I think that's what I mainly do, like the movement and the freedom. I want to show that in my sculpture, so they're always a bit weird. Like leaves the wrong way around and stuff. Yeah, that's just not important for what I want to say, that it's anatomically correct. You know, like this guy, I mean, he's obviously not, well, I hope you can see, obviously not finished. There's still a long way to go. But this is about a story, and there's a village northwest of Victoria where the Steampunk Festival was 2 years ago that we went to. And it's the start of the Little Desert National Park. It's only 3 streets, the whole town, but it's an amazing little town. And there's a curiosity shop that's huge, and it's really, well, it's not a miracle that the Steampunk Festival is there. And there's this guy, so there's a photo in the curiosity shop, and I was like, that guy, is he walking his turkey? And they were like, yep. That was a local farmer, and he would walk through town every day with his turkey. So I've started with the farmer, and I just wanted, I don't really remember the photo anymore. He might have been short and fat, but I envision him as this lanky man that's sort of, you know, old. He's strolling through the town where it's always hot for some reason. The turkey isn't far yet, but he got his turkey by his side. So that'll happen after someday. But sometimes it takes time to really develop. So this one is a little maquette. So I made a plate of wax, and I just broke it into bits. And this is not finished. It lost its face, actually. But sticking wax together is really easy. When you have a hot tool, you just go and it sticks. Then you have to leave it alone. So this is a maquette for a large sculpture that I want to make from steel. But obviously you don't start like 4 meters high in steel. You just, so I'm just making a few maquettes and getting an idea on where it's going. So it had a face like that. And what's the maquette? Oh, it's like a little model. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's like a model. Yeah. So it's going to be a big bird. Yeah. Right. So this is essentially the prototype. Yeah, it's like a sketch, but 3D. Yeah, and then you can sort of feel if the shapes make sense, and if you want to change it. And obviously now I've just got a big bowl with lots of bits. If I would make this into a big one, you can much more consciously cut the pieces that you want in the shape that you need. So most of my work is not here. And this is one that I just finished. So that's going to show in February in Nerim. For me, this is sort of coming out of something, out of a not so nice time, maybe. Yeah, so it's a bird, obviously, has all the feathers. They're a little bit fiery. So that's the really fun thing with ceramics, I think, because you can work with glazes, you can work with colors. And if you know your glazes, you can use them very intentionally. I really wanted the top of the head being very different than the body, but the body, I wanted that movement and just escaping from whatever. I just had a really fun conversation. Yeah. It was really good fun. For everyone who's watching, where can people find you? Yeah, so my name is Aukje Van Vark, which no one can spell. So I'll put it in the captions. My business is called Pig and Chisel, because I thought that people can remember that, because it's almost Pig and Whistle, but it is actually Pig and Chisel. On Instagram, I'm pig_and_chisel. I'm on Facebook. I've got a website, and I am in Cockatoo, and I welcome people to do studio visits. I do workshops. We've got accommodation next door, so you can even rent that. A big thank you to Aukje for the interview and for the conversation. It was really fun to listen to her background and her development as an artist, as well as her creative process. If you enjoyed this conversation, you should check out the challenge that Aukje and I undertook, where we set a pretty strict time limit to see if we can create something fun, something different, just to get our creative juices flowing and just to play in the process of creativity. Make sure to click the link to check out that video, and if you enjoy this, please like and subscribe.